see folks still trickling in. Welcome to the March edition of the Center for Behavioral Intervention Technologies webinar. My name is Jessica Schleider. I'm an associate professor of medical social sciences, pediatrics, and psychology here at Northwestern. I'm also the director of digital services at CBITS. And I'm super delighted to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Terika McCall. Dr. McCall is an assistant professor in the Biostatistics Department at the Yale School of Public Health, secondary faculty at Yale School of Medicine's Department of Biomedical Informatics and Data Science, and director of the Consumer Health Informatics Lab, CHIL, at Yale. Dr. McCall's research interests focus on reducing disparities in mental health service access and use through technology. Specifically, she examines the use of telehealth modalities to deliver mental health services and resources to communities that are underserved. Her expertise is user-centered design and usability testing of digital health tools, and she has experience leading multidisciplinary teams in industry and academia in the development of digital health tools. She also currently teaches a course on the topic user-centered design of digital health tools at Yale School of Public Health. As director of CHIL, Dr. McCall provides guidance to faculty and students in the development of digital health tools, such as clinical decision support tools, mobile apps, and wearables for diverse populations. Dr. McCall is about to take it away. If you have questions that you'd like addressed at the end, please type them in the chat and we'll get to as many as we can at the end, hopefully with some time for discussion. So Dr. McCall, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Great. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to the talk today. I'm going to talk about digital mental health interventions that I've been working on with my team to develop with Black American women who have history of anxiety or depression. And so this quote, I think we're on a cusp of some change, actually came from one of the focus group participants as they were talking about, basically the question was posed in the past 5 years, has there been any change in attitudes? Do you feel there's been any change in attitudes towards receiving any mental health services? And so they were talking about, they think we're on the cusp of some change because they're seeing especially young adults kind of push forward, the narrative and lies going to seek care, and also the use of digital mental health tools. So today I'll talk about the potential for digital technology to reduce mental health inequities and present 2 examples of using a user-centered design approach to create digital health tools. One being WellSys, which is a mobile app to support management of anxiety and depression among Black American women. And then the other one is Welcome Home, which is a mobile app to support formerly incarcerated individuals that are rejoining their communities. I actually had a diversity supplement on this grant to find out the needs of Black women during transitioning from carceral settings to their community and to tailor the features of the app to better meet their needs as well. Then I'll just end by discussing some ethical considerations when designing digital health tools, especially for communities that are underserved. So I'll start by stating that we should always have at the forefront of our minds how the digital health tool we are creating will be used to reduce health inequities. Digital health tools such as mobile apps and wearables can be used to increase access to health services and resources due to the ability to scale to local communities and globally. Though there is possibly a higher upfront development cost, access to digital health tools can be offered to users at no or low cost, which can help to increase access. And then we have the ability to personalize it more. For example, your settings in a mental health app can be personalized to increase usefulness, engagement, and the effectiveness of interventions. Digital health tools can also be used to facilitate patient-provider communication and shared decision-making. And it can be, we can think about its interoperability with the EHR to better tailor treatment plans and do things like digital phenotyping, collecting raw sensing and phone use data, and then also collecting things like patient-reported outcomes. But what happens when communities that are underserved are not included in the design process? So, as we think about it, right, we've possibly created more options, but disparity still persists. Or worse, we've now created intervention-generated inequalities where individuals who already have greater access to mental health resources and services than those from marginalized communities now have additional resources. So they just have one more thing, right? While those who would benefit the most are left behind. So there's also an issue of creating tools that are not culturally relevant. Specifically, as I think back on meeting with focus group participants, they said if I can't relate to the content, then I'll find it less useful because it doesn't address my needs and preferences. And then we have the issue of mistrust, right? So if I don't feel like my community was considered, much less a part of this process of creating this technology, I may be less likely to trust the company or the researchers that made it. Right. So the first project I want to talk about is this app. It's called Welcome Home, and we designed it specifically to help individuals who are transitioning from jail or prison right back into the community. And so, as I mentioned earlier, I had actually a supplement on this grant to look at meeting with Black women who have a history of incarceration and talk to them about what their needs were when trying to transition back to their communities. Give it 1 second. This is very graphics heavy, so it took a minute to load. There we go. So I just want to start with a little bit of background about this project. So one reason why it was important for us to have focus groups, specifically with Black women, to talk to them about their experience is because Black women in the US are incarcerated at nearly twice the rate of their white counterparts. And they are also more likely to experience mental illness. Things such as depressive disorders, major depressive disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder than even non-institutionalized Black women. But we know that there's these barriers such as limited access to services and support, lack of transportation, and lack of knowledge regarding mental illness and treatment options that prevent recently released individuals from receiving care. So although just, in talking to them about their experience while they were incarcerated, we know that correctional facilities are required to provide mental health care. However, they are strained as far as resources, and often mental health care takes a lower priority at the correctional facility. And this is primarily due to, leadership's decisions in making priorities, right? So this can result in a lack of screening and limited mental health treatment for individuals with a serious mental illness. Also, access to mental health care and continuity of treatment post-release. We know it's extremely important because it may affect their physical health. Also, it affects how quickly they can reintegrate back into their communities and recidivism, right? So if they're more likely to return, essentially be repeat offenders or return back to carceral settings in the future, right? So mental health care is of utmost importance because it affects all of these things. So our goal for this project really was to support and empower them as they try to reestablish themselves. And so, our specific aim was basically to better understand the needs and preferences of incarceration impacted Black women. And we wanted to know specifically about their needs so that we could better tailor the content and features for this app to support them. So I want to talk a little bit about the methods that we used in actually doing our needs assessment. So we actually had individual in-depth semi-structured interviews and focus groups. And these were conducted with individuals with a history of incarceration to understand their experience rejoining their communities after release from jail or prison. We explored individual, organizational, and systemic factors that serve as barriers or facilitators to accessing health and social services and resources post-release. And also how technology can be used to support them during this transitionary period. So the design process was actually very iterative, and it included these in-depth interviews followed by rapid analysis, interpretation sessions, user experiencing user interface design of a very high fidelity prototype of the app. We then solicited user feedback, which was great, right? And one thing that we learned is that with working with this community, that they often feel like no one listens to them. So even when we, created this high fidelity prototype using a prototyping tool called Figma, and we came back to them and we were showing them the designs, they were so impressed because they said, "We can't believe you listened to us," right? So the things that we said that we needed, you actually incorporated into the design. And for us, we were like, well, what do you mean? You can't believe that you were listened to. But working with this population, say oftentimes that, because they have been in these carceral settings, they don't get listened to, and they feel like if they do give their input, it's nothing's going to happen with it, right? So it was great to actually get their feedback and to show them that we are actually incorporating what they said, and then make those refinements to the prototype based on that. And so I just want to talk a little bit more about how we collect the data, right? So specifically with the women who were, basically coming back to their communities, we had 4 focus groups with 14 Black women. And they were ages 25 to 54. And this is in New Haven, Connecticut, right? And like I said, we wanted to better understand their needs. So what were the results? One, we gained a better understanding of their mental health needs and their post-incarceration needs outside of mental health, right? So one thing we learned too is that upon diagnosis with a mental health condition, right, they felt that there was a general lack of understanding of the diagnosis, of the benefits and side effects of medications and alternative treatments. So we wanted to know, did they understand whether they were diagnosed while they were in carceral settings or, outside of carceral settings? Did they have an understanding of their diagnosis? Did they know about what were the benefits and side effects of the different medications they were prescribed? And we found out that the answer was largely no, right? They mostly had negative experiences using mental health services and resources while incarcerated. And they said, basically they had 2 main options that they would utilize, right? It would be group therapy and the Medline. And a lot of them stressed that, pretty much everybody was in the Medline, right? And so there was this and I'll talk about this, there was an over-reliance on medication they felt instead of actually, having other alternative forms of treatment to meet their needs. So now post-incarceration, we talked to them about, what would be beneficial to them to help them as they transition back to community. And they talked about basically receiving a packet of information, and, they felt it was completely inadequate, right? They received a packet of information as they transitioned back to their community, and they said it makes you feel like you received a lot, but there's not not much in there to help you. Still have to go and kind of do the footwork to ask around to access resources. So they did say that an app that provided content and features to address first basic needs such as employment, housing, healthcare, and their medical needs would be helpful during the reentry period, right? They also stressed that support needed to be presented in a tiered format. So they wanted it to basically escalate from support for self-management to having peer support. For example, they mentioned having like support group for women who have a history of incarceration. And then they also wanted to be able to connect with a community health worker for not just mental health support, but also support in, getting resources, for example, food assistance and housing. They also mentioned the need for crisis support. For example, with this population and returning home, they mentioned wanting support and connections to domestic violence shelters in case they needed it. So in our discussion, we realized there's, so much support needed, right, as they're transitioning back to their communities. And mental health care within the carceral system is over medicalized, and the support provided during the reentry period is very insufficient. So we use this user-centered design and trauma-informed design approach to actually create an app called Welcome Home. And we hope that it would truly benefit them and support them during their transition, right? So what are some of the lessons learned from this particular project? One, we learned that it could be extremely difficult to schedule our participants to meet for the focus group because they don't control their schedules. Working with women who are recently released from incarceration. Some of them were at facilities where they had to, ask for permission to be at the focus group, come back at a certain time. So it was hard to schedule because they weren't in control. A lot of them weren't in control of their schedules. Also, the costs, right? So there was limited funding to support relationship building. We would have the focus groups and they would say, are we going to do this again next week? Because we had such a good time in the conversation, but we had limited funding to actually support relationship building outside of actually having the focus groups and collecting the data for the design of the app. We also learned that there was some need for support around digital literacy, right? Use of technology. Some of the women were familiar with using like smartphones, and others were saying, well, when I went in, I didn't have access to all of this technology. And so there would be basically some need to help them navigate things like an app that's designed for this purpose. Also, there was limited knowledge of mental health resources. And this is an extremely transient population. So trying to engage them in the study and also keep them engaged in keeping updated with the app, right? So for example, the app is very localized. The resources are for New Haven. So for a transient population, if they're not in the area, the engagement may drop because it's not as useful. And then alignment of priorities, right, came up, right? So basic needs versus research needs. And what we learned really is we had to kind of partner with other organizations, like Office of Public Health Practice, some community organizations to see how we can meet basic needs. For example, doing things like having a toy drive for their children, donating coats, because it's hard to get people to talk about mental health when their basic needs are not met, right? If they need connections to food services. So making sure that in thinking about, mental health, right? Not having your basic needs met affects your mental health. So balancing those needs and seeing, if we can't do anything with, as far as like for the grant, how can we partner with other organizations to help to meet some basic needs as we do this work? So those were just some of the lessons that we learned from this project. And so I just wanted to show you the current, this is the initial design for the app. So it's currently in development, right? And basically what we learned from the interviews in the larger study and the focus group with only Black women is that they had a need for legal advice, housing, things like food and jobs, healthcare. They wanted to be connected to MyChart, and then also have some resources for mental health services as well. And then also childcare, right? So we currently have a paper that's under review on designing technology assisted interventions for justice impacted Black American women that hopefully will get accepted. And then we can share that paper. But I just wanted to first share this study and talk about how we met with women to talk about, their basic and mental health needs to try to tailor something specifically to help them better reintegrate back into their communities. So the next project I'm going to speak about, some of you may be familiar with. I feel like I give an update on this every year, but for those that are, this is your first time hearing me speak about it, I'm going to basically do a recap. So this is a study called WellSys, and it's focused on Black women who have a history of anxiety and depression. And so for those who may not know, approximately 1 in 4 Black women experience mental illness in the past year. So this is what the current data shows, right? So approximately 32% who reported experiencing mental illness in the past year did not receive mental health treatment during that time. So what we see is though, although there is a need, there's a lot of unmet need where they're not actually going to seek treatment. So we know there are many barriers that prevent Black women from receiving care. Things such as higher levels of stigma in the community, structural gendered racism, less access to treatment, mistrust of providers, and limited health literacy. The reason why we decided to focus on anxiety and depression is because anxiety and mood disorders, such as major depressive disorder, are the most common mental health conditions among Black women, with approximately 16% experiencing generalized anxiety in their lifetime and around 27% experiencing depression in their lifetime. So disparities in mental health service use is concerning because poor management of anxiety and depressive symptoms contribute to lower quality of life, loss of productivity, and poor medication adherence, which may lead to worse health outcomes. And this is especially concerning for individuals with chronic health conditions. So as you may know, there have been numerous studies that have found that mobile health interventions increase access to mental health services and resources, and they are effective in helping participants reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression. However, the majority of published studies were conducted with predominantly white participants, which may affect the generalizability of the results to other racial and ethnic groups. So previous studies have shown that Black women are comfortable with participating in mHealth research and interventions. And it says here 80%, but actually over 80% own smartphones, right? So therefore, we know there is great potential due to this to actually remedy the disparities in mental health service use by leveraging use of smartphones for information dissemination and delivery of mental health services and culturally relevant resources. So I'm going to talk about the focus groups. And so the focus groups that we had for this project were primarily to answer the research question of what content and features should be included in a smartphone app that's tailored to support management of anxiety and depression among Black American women. And so the focus group sessions were actually held at Durham County Library and at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And this was pre-pandemic, so right before COVID hit in January 2020. So we recruited women who were 18 years or older and identified as Black or African American, or multi-race, Black and another race, and they were eligible to participate. Participants were recruited through a web-based survey that was actually launched prior to the focus groups, as well as through postings on social media sites and flyers posted at public locations in the Durham and Chapel Hill areas. So the topics of the focus group discussion included past and current causes of anxiety and depression and coping skills used, attitudes and perceptions towards mental illness and receiving mental health treatment, content and features needed in a smartphone app designed to help Black American women manage anxiety and depression, and barriers and facilitators to the use of a smartphone app for mental health care. So now I'll dive into the results by first discussing the characteristics of the focus group participants. So we had 20 women that attended one of the four focus groups. And in each focus group, we had 5 participants. The study participants range in age from 21 to 79 years old. So we had a multi-generational cohort. However, I do want to note that 75% of the participants were less than 50 years old, 50 years old. So they did range, uh, basically they were younger, more than were younger than 50. So the focus group participants shared that in the past, they primarily used mental health and wellness app that had features for meditation, mood tracking, calorie intake, and activity monitoring and deep breathing exercises. In addition, the use of music apps and listening to podcasts was popular. Inspirational messages on social media were also mentioned as being beneficial to mental wellness. And so they basically express this as, their past experience and how they've used apps in the past to support their mental wellness. So in the focus group, the recommendations focused on the type of content and features that should be included in the app, as well as suggestions on how to increase the app's usage and to establish trust with the users. So here's a snapshot of the design recommendations. And I'll take a few minutes just to discuss them in a little bit more detail. Right. So as far as content, many suggestions were given on the content that should be included in the app to help Black American women manage anxiety and depression. Recommendations were either informational or inspirational. For example, participants stated that they would like information about how to find a Black woman therapist in the area, guidance on how to deal with common stressors such as microaggressions and imposter syndrome, and then information about events in the area to connect with other Black women. Inspirational messages and encouraging stories about how others overcame adversity were also desired. And the participants also recommended having positive and supportive messages in the app and suggested readings that promote mental wellness. As far as the features, they said they wanted the features to allow them to monitor their progress. They also wanted to practice coping techniques and connect with others. So, for example, participants suggested that the app had features to track anxiety, depression, and mood. And in addition, they recommended guided meditation, deep breathing, and other coping techniques narrated by a Black woman. And so participants say that most meditation apps use a British or Australian voice to narrate. However, they desired to hear what they described as the Black auntie voice, think Tabitha Brown. So in other words, they wanted to hear the caring voice of a middle-aged Black American woman. And then lastly, they recommended having group chat rooms to connect with other users and the ability to connect with therapists through the app, whether it be through messaging or a video call. So when we asked them, what could we do to promote use of the app, they state that, they would be more likely to use the app. One, if, of course, they found value in it, but they really, really emphasize the importance of feeling a sense of community when using the app. They wanted, again, to be able to connect with a therapist and be able to receive support in managing their anxiety and depression through learning different coping skills. But this sense of community really was what they felt would make the app really sticky, right? Other things were, kind of common practice in creating apps, make sure that the interface is clean and the app is intuitive and easy to use. They also suggested having these accountability features, such as like some type of daily mood check-in, and then gamification of the app, so it can give them a sense of accomplishment. So of course, if there were too many, it's too many notifications, or if, for example, any of the activities or exercises in the app took too long to complete, they said that definitely would discourage them from using it. But overall, they were really excited about being a part of this, part of the process to create something that was truly tailored for them to help them manage anxiety and depression. So we definitely wanted to, address the topic of trust, because we know that for a lot of the participants, this might be an issue. And we found that, most of the participants' concerns were about their security and privacy, right? When we did ask them about their concern. There was concern that the app could be hacked and their data disclosed. There was also some apprehension about who would actually own the app and their data sharing policies. So they, actually asked me, they were like, do you own the app? Like, we just need to know who's going to have access to our data. So they were aware that there had been many breaches in the news, like data breaches in the news, which concerned participants. They were also aware that many apps sell user data, and their primary concern was that the data would be used to not only harm them personally, but also to potentially harm Black women in general. So they were concerned if the data would be used to, for example, paint Black women in a negative light as far as when it comes to mental health. So they really did kind of question like who would own the app, who would own the data, and wanted that to be transparent if they decided to use the app, right? So here's the paper that was actually published on the design recommendations. And you can scan the QR code to access the paper, or I can also send it to you. But feel free to, take a deeper dive into, the findings here. So what I wanted to share as far as updates, I think the last time I was here, I mentioned that, the app that we had created, the initial prototype, it had a lot of really great features, but what it was truly missing was the therapeutic content. And I started the app as a PhD student, like $0, basically to do this work, and a lot of volunteers in creating that initial prototype. So luckily was able to get some funding from Google to actually have co-design workshops with community members, so Black women who have a history of anxiety or depression, and Black women mental health professionals came together to have these co-design workshops last semester to design the therapeutic content, which is culture responsive, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy features for the app. So this picture that you see is actually from one of the workshops where we're using this game board that our team designed, this game called Care Pathways, where they're given a game board and they're given decks of cards. So for each color-coded space, right, they would basically go through their deck of cards that correspond to that space and put the card down. And it basically goes, you know, based on this situation, I would like to learn this MBCT technique. I would like to have it delivered in this way, right? Using this specific technology, whether it be chatbot, whether it be, an interactive animation. I would like to have this type of support, whether it's a peer within the app, whether it be a therapist, right? And then based on that, this is the idealized outcome I want to have at the end. So it's basically like design your own treatment plan, but with like it's guided, right? And the situations are based on the literature and just experiences of Black women, as far as like things that we know have caused like lots of anxiety and depression, PTSD, etc. So this was actually a great way to actually have this type of conversation with two sets of experts, right? Experts with lived experience and subject matter experts in the room to actually co-design the therapeutic content and to culturally tailor it. So we actually, and I can show you, this is like the current version of the app. We're now in a design sprint to design that culturally responsive mindfulness-based cognitive therapy features for the app. We recently got our paper accepted, a late break, basically it was accepted late breaking work for Kai on using this technique, the care pathways. So happy to share the paper once it's published as well as the templates, right? So the game board, the templates for the cards, because what we found, not only the community members, but the mental health professionals that were there were saying, can we get this to actually use in our practice right now, where we could sit down with our clients and actually design basically a treatment plan with them using this situation-based game. So that was great, and having that feedback and being able to design with them. Um, so it happened. I was also, when I was asked last time, how was this going to happen with having these two sets of experts? I was like, I don't know. We'll see. We're optimistic, but it happened and it turned out to be great. Okay, so I just want to close and leave enough time for questions with just talking about some of the ethical considerations and challenges. So, the use of digital health tools we know is on the rise. It's going to continue to be on the rise, even as we think about how we're leveraging AI and generative AI as we create digital mental health tools. We have to think about how we're protecting our users' privacy and confidentiality. Those concerns have to be adequately addressed. Protecting their personally identifiable information and protected health information is of utmost importance. There must be complete transparency on data ownership and use. As I talked about in the focus groups, where they really just kind of like pointed at me, and like, do you own it? Because we need to know who's actually going to have this data and what they plan to do with it, right? Also, I want to stress that a one-size-fits-all approach to designing interventions may lead to more options, but continued disparity in receiving mental health care. And to increase the likelihood of adoption, health interventions should be culturally informed, right? So ideally, you want to be creating it with your intended users, right? So not just with your team. Basically incorporating the recommendations from participants and knowledge of their technology usage and behaviors may help to mitigate future intervention generated inequalities. And I truly believe that designing for the most marginalized communities improves the digital health tool for all users, right? So when you think about who are might they would benefit the most, but they're also the most vulnerable populations. Designing for them actually makes it a better tool for everyone. So we should also, in addition to that, consider whether our intended users have access to internet-enabled devices, high-speed internet, and their digital and health literacy. So these are just some of the considerations, right? Some of the things that impact whether communities who have the greatest need and therefore, they would actually benefit the most, right, are able to use the digital health tools that we're creating. So I provided two examples of, projects that we're working on with community members. And so, when we think about social justice as it pertains to healthcare, is the idea that everyone deserves equal access to culturally appropriate resources and services to improve their health and well-being. So I really, want to kind of drive home that point, and that thinking about as we design who's at the table, so to speak, in informing the design, right? And who's at the table, again, not just that one time for the needs assessment and giving feedback on doing the usability testing, on giving feedback on the implementation or giving input into the implementation and so on, right? So this can't be accomplished this can't be accomplished if their needs and preferences are not considered from the outset, right? So we can't design something that's going to be truly inclusive if we don't include them from the very beginning. Let me just take one sip of water. So in closing, I just want to echo again what one of the WellSys focus group participants said, and this was the title of my talk. I think we're on a cusp of some change, right? So we still have a long way to go, but it gives me hope as I meet with participants and, they say, well, I'm having conversations with my family members that about like going to seek mental health care. Right. So we weren't having these conversations 10 years ago, but it's been normalized more even in the media where a lot of our shows we're seeing main characters go to see their therapists or have, basically a video call with their therapist. So the more that it's normalized, we're seeing that it kind of plays out in the communities as well. Um, we have a recent paper that was published from this focus group that talked about, you know, basically our attitudes and perceptions towards using mental health services. And one thing that I want to stress in closing is that there was this acknowledgement that, the younger adults were really seen as the catalysts for normalizing discussions about mental health and the use of tech for mental health care. And so that's where that, we had a older adult participant said, I think we're on the cusp of some change. And so I want to close with just kind of, I guess, admonishing you to just think about as you're designing these digital mental health tools, how do I make sure that I'm being inclusive in the design, not just of the tool itself, but even in like recruitment methods, um, and making sure that those who are underrepresented are being represented in what's being created. Thank you so much. I'll go ahead and answer any questions at this time.
That was so amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Should I stop sharing?
Oh, wait, what was that?
Should I stop
Oh,
sharing?
sure. You can tap Sarah. Yeah, no
Okay.
problem. And then as you'll see, we have lots of questions coming through, and that is always common as it continues to move along. I imagine we'll see even more.
Yeah.
So I realize I'll just sort of go in a bit of order as I see it, but I actually love this first one in relation to what you were just closing on in terms of ethics, is that how do you think about, evaluate, and intervene on digital literacy?
Yeah. So when it comes to thinking about digital literacy, what we've done in the past is talk to them about their experience in using technology. And based on, for example, if they said, well, I don't have much experience using a smartphone, thinking about whether we could have someone that's a part of our team or a community health worker having some type of navigator to help them learn how to use the technology. Even as we're, designing some of the therapeutic features now, we're thinking about our users who may not be high tech, right? And not trying to overcomplicate it, right? So we want to make sure that we are creating things that are going to be effective, but everything doesn't have to be flashy, right? It just needs to be effective. So what's been
I
helpful.
will say though, your app is the various visuals you were showing are so gorgeous, but
Oh,
also
thank
I
you.
know I appreciate what you're saying too.
Thank you. I have to give credit to my team. Like I have some people that are artists, so and UX
It
UI
looks so
designers.
strong. It's awesome.
So making that assessment on an individual basis is important, and then providing resources to actually help them to learn how to use the technology. Before we said, okay, we just needed, have tutorials on how to use the app. And then as we're having these conversations, especially with women who are returning home for incarceration, we said, well, we need to back up a step and, have some tutorials on using the iPhone, because our Android phone, right? So thinking about just things that we may not consider, right? Because every day we pick up our phone, we're like, okay, we know how to use this easily. Thinking about making sure we can have those assessments so that we can provide the resources that they need. Yeah.
Really wonderful. Um, hmm. This is an interesting question. It is so vital to maintain the interest of participants and tremendously mutually helpful when they wish to maintain engagement. When there's insufficient funding to continue the discussions with the participants, as you mentioned, are there opportunities for professionals to volunteer to fill in? I mean, I was like going to say just email. No, we're always looking for people who are excited, and that's what a wonderful question. But I defer to you, of course, on how to answer that.
Okay, so I will say this, right? Even though funding is like, we've been operating on such a like lean budget for a long time, that even when we don't have a lot of funding, we found ways to still engage with our participants. So we've done things like create infographics. We'll send updates when we have papers and usually attach an infographic that they can share with their family and friends as well, provide project updates. And then a lot of them too will just check in. We'll get an email and they'll say, just checking in if you need us to come in and give feedback on the design now, or come in for usability testing. And then we'll say, okay, we're not quite there yet. We'll, go ahead and send out an email when we're ready. So I think that there are some opportunities to think outside of I won't say outside the box, but just think broadly about how you can still continue to keep participants updated and engaged in the project, even when the funding runs out. And I hope I'm answering your question correctly, where you were asking about engagement with the project and not necessarily engagement with the app. So just want to clarify.
It was an anonymous attendee, but they could write back
there
later. Can you please tell me how social networks influence the buy-in and engagement? And you spoke a lot about sort of, I love even, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's huge, right? So they talk about the importance of community, and a lot of resources get shared, and it's just word of mouth, right? So they said, have it basically, if I learn about this app, right, I can then share it with all of my friends, etc. They stress that they they wanted to continue to get these updates to learn when it was going to be released, but also going back to like peer support and thinking about the engagement within the app, right? They said that, yes, we want, features for self-management, but we also want to be able to talk to other women who have similar experiences. For example, in the app, in the Welcome Home app, there are some women who are coming home and they're trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to do to get my children, back with me, right? So for them, it's helpful. And I've seen this play out in the in-person group meetings, because outside of focus groups, and this is very important, I actually went to the support group meetings, right? And went to like events that they hosted and supported in that way. So it's not just, oh, we came and did the focus groups and got our data and left, but actually being a part of their programming and things they have going on. So, and supporting them. And I found that, just sitting there and listening to them, they said, well, this person, they have navigated the process of, getting their children back now that they're out. Learning from them what they did is important. So having that type of social network within the app was seen as like kind of like the sticky part of it, right? Because it's hyper localized too. They have a community board where oftentimes things are, for example, they're having some type of giveaway that's happening on the green. And they're like, if someone could snap a picture or put a note, and then we can all know about it right before this opportunity is gone, that bring a lot of value to the app, right? Knowing about resources in real time.
Agreed. And there's so many new questions coming in. Did you get a sense of how open folks are to generative AI?
No, so this project actually was, as far as the focus groups, was done before like generative AI, I feel, really took off, right? So we knew, like, of course, some mental health mental health apps are using AI, but this study, the first study I talked about, we wrapped up actually in, I think it was 2023. And the last study that I spoke about with WellSys, we had those focus groups in 2020, and then last semester when we had the co-design workshops, it was really just talking about designing the culture responsive MBCT features. So we didn't get into conversation about generative AI, but that's something that we definitely will be asking about in the future. And we know like there are, some great benefits to possibly integrating it into something like the WellSys app, but then also a lot of concerns too, right? Especially when you think about designing something for mental health. And I'm not sold on like using generative AI in the app just yet, unless maybe it's used for like patient education. And then even then, I don't want it to hallucinate and say something that is like not true. So I'm kind of like on the fence of using generative AI right now. Yeah.
Still a lot to learn.
Right.
There's a question that went to your earlier point about the role of community, and it says, I love the idea that facilitating a sense of community is likely a core mechanism for digital health engagement. She hears this investigator, Alex, hears that from the population she works with, which is young cancer survivors, or young people with cancer. So how do you measure the degree of community connection in your work?
We don't measure it right now, but that's something that we should.
Maybe
Yeah.
you guys keep up and thinking about it because it's a great I wish there was a
Yeah.
way people could get off the mute on webinars or whatever. I know exactly. Another question, which is really lovely to your one of your closing slides around the ethical considerations, was around health literacy, also includes language access and plain language digitally. How are you ensuring inclusive access for users who face limited English proficiency?
Yeah, so right now, the app is just in English, but in the future, we're thinking about how we're going to be able to, increase access by making sure that it's like multilingual. And so there's ways that we feel like we will be able to leverage AI for that. So,
Great point.
yeah.
Um, um, How are the justice-involved youth living with trauma also included and provided access to this tool and its development? You mentioned older populations, but not their roles in families and communities as parents and or youth that have and or are incarcerated.
Right. Yeah, so for this project, it's only adults that we had as a part of the study. I think that's, it would be great to kind of think about, what a tool for justice involved youth would look like. For this particular project, we provide resources and support around like childcare, and then also things that came up in the focus group when they talked about how do you, even after you get your children, you're able to reconnect with your children, right? You come out, you're able to get them back in your home. Then they express like sometimes there's a lot of like anger and resentment, right? And how do you navigate having those conversations, especially with older children? The smaller ones may not know too much of what is going on, but for the older children, how do you have those conversations and have kind of facilitate healing within the family after you've been released from incarceration? So thinking about how we could support them, and there's one thing to just kind of say, okay, we're going to provide these resources, but there are specific situations that are unique to this population that they're looking, for example, a therapist that has experience working with families where one of the parents is justice involved, right? And helping to facilitate that kind of connection with their children and have that family therapy. So we're thinking about how to support in that way in regards to like better supporting children, but we don't have right now an app that's focused on youth.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I'd be curious to hear about the kind of frameworks you tend to use when co-creating.
Yeah, so we've used a user-centered design framework where Depending on the population, right? So we may decide that we're doing individual interviews, focus groups, co-design workshops like the ones that I showed. And really at the center of it is, coming in and from taking kind of like a more humble approach and saying, can you tell us more about your experience and trying to understand their experience so that we can then think about what does that translate into the design. So we do a lot of human-centered design work and use a lot of participatory research methods, right? So a lot of our work is yes, in the HCI space, but also thinking about public health and how we could even use like CBPR. We haven't actually done any projects with that, use true CBPR yet, more participatory research methods. And so that's kind of our approach, is trying to make sure as much as possible that the participants are centered in the work that we do, right? And at every stage, right? So, I don't know if you've ever seen I used to have it in this slide deck, the user-centered design figure where the user's at the center and it has like the needs assessment. And as you go through each stage, you make sure that you're checking in with your users, your intended users, to make sure you're designing, something that's going to actually be beneficial to them.
Mm-hmm. And I think our closing question was, it's sort of a cut off from the opening, which is incredible talk and work, and thank you. But that they close by saying, do you have any advice for graduate students who want to get involved in UCD work but may have limited funding?
Yeah, I would say, and I encourage my students to, right? So there's different courses that you know, you could enroll in, or even some. I went to YouTube and there's like a ton of videos on user-centered design, and I think is it the NNP group?
The Nielsen Norman
Yes,
NN.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. They
Mhm.
have tons of videos, right? Um,
And really helpful, sort of like easy to read, quick articles about
Yeah,
this. Yep,
it's
agree.
very digestible, which is what I love about their content. So
Yep.
just getting started there. I also encourage them to learn how to use things like Figma. So Figma is a tool that we use in the lab. It's free for students. You can get a free account and it's a no code, right? So a lot of times like students say, oh, well, do I need to know how to code? And I'm like, you don't need to know how to code to actually use Figma to develop a high fidelity prototype. And so that's something that you could use, and you don't have to like think about, okay, where am I going to get money for a developer at this stage? You could actually have something that literally I have the app on my phone and it feels like a native app, right? It feels like
Yep.
something that I installed from the App Store. So that's something that you can learn how to use as well.
Amazing. And I'll just then take that as an opportunity if to do a shameless plug that here at CBITS, we also offer a reading course every year, free. And the readings themselves are currently, and the syllabus are online on our center website. So with that, it's 1:00. Terika, this was amazing. As always, we appreciate you. And we look forward to seeing everyone next month. And you're getting the good hearts and all the
Thank
amazing
you.
emojis coming through at the bottom. I love that. Thank
I
you
feel, I
again.
feel
Have a
like this
great
is
one.
my yearly check-in. I appreciate you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Terika.
Bye.
Bye.